Hey guys, welcome to By the Horns, a Bitcoin podcast about South Africa. I'm your host, Ricky Allardyce. By the Horns is proudly brought to you by Bitvice, the only place in South Africa to buy self-custody sats. Now, in today's episode, I spoke to Nick Hudson. Nick is one of the founding members of Panda, which stands for Pandemics Data Analysis. These guys got together early in 2020, at the start of the COVID crisis, to create models for what they predicted deaths, cases, etc., related to the COVID crisis were going to be. They found that they were very accurate in their predictions and that the government predictions and the government funded scientists were order of magnitude off. So Panda, they took this data to the government, tried to engage with them in good faith, and tried to help government get to the bottom of this. They were rejected pretty much out of hand. And what happened then was Panda realized very quickly that the government had no interest in engaging with private experts, but really were just singing off global institutions' hymn sheets, such as WHO and the Gates Foundation. So Nick and I chatted all about Panda's model, what they got right, what they got wrong, and what exactly is going on. Like, why are governments following the Gates Foundation and the WHO, and why will they not listen to anyone else? What are the incentive trails? We follow the money. And also, how do the media get onto the payroll of the Gates Foundation, the Open Society, etc., etc., and what effect that has for the discourse and the level of discussion that we see happening in our public domain? Super interesting discussion. We touched a bit on Bitcoin at the end and how we can fix this, the battle of decentralization between decentralization versus centralization, why it's so important, and how if we do not decentralize, humanity is pretty screwed. Super interesting. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe on YouTube, or you can find the audio version of this podcast on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, or you can even stream it on Breeze Wallet, which is a podcasting 2.0 platform. All right, guys, onto the show. Enjoy it. Cheers. And we're live. Nick, before we start this, there's something very important we need to get to, and I think it's that people figure out what side of the fence you're on. Are you on Team Green Taraka or Team Nizaluri?
Well, I've been converted to the new names because I got tired of being corrected. So I do actually call it Nizaluri, but respond to the calls as if they were always Luris.
You got tired of people calling you anti-Taraka. Just carried on for too long. Okay, and then secondly, Cape Franklin or Cape Spurfile.
I've adapted to all the new names, so Spurfile it is.
So for those people who don't know what the hell we're talking about, Nick's a Twitcher, a birder in English. That must be where you got your patience from to deal with what you've been dealing with for the last 2 years, is waiting for birds.
Well, birding is actually, if you well, at least if you do it the way I do it, it's not a pastime that requires patience at all. It's very much the sort of a gentleman's form of hunting for the modern era. So you'll find me blundering through wetlands and forests and getting cut up and messed up in the process of trying to find some rare gem in a godforsaken corner of Zambia. I love that. I love the sort of rough and ready, uncut version of exploring in nature, and birding is a wonderful way of doing it. It sort of really exposes you to the ecology of a certain biome and makes you think hard. You start noticing things a lot more than you do when you're maybe going game watching or on safari. It's a more visceral experience.
And have you always been into bird watching? How long have you been doing this for?
I've always had a very strong interest in nature, and I started being from a very young age going to the national parks with my grandparents and my parents, and so it became a way of life. And it was quite late in life that I started, by virtue of going away with a friend who was quite seriously into birding. I was introduced to this. I caught the glimpse of that greater understanding that could be obtained if you started understanding that part of the ecology. And I was immediately bitten. I mean, that was 2013, and 9 years later, I've seen approaching 800 of the 900 and something species that are viewable in the southern African sub-region, and I've birded all over Africa and elsewhere in the world. It's not. I'm not a fanatic like many of these guys who that every single holiday is spent around that. I have lots and lots of interests, so I need to pack all sorts of things in addition to the birding. But I do get Wonderlust if I haven't gone on a really decent 9-day trip through Uganda or whatnot.
In the Cape Floral Kingdom, we obviously spoiled with diversity of plants. It's like the most diverse floral kingdom in the world, but there's no mammals really. There's a couple of small ones, so it's not very exciting. But there's a huge amount of birds because there's a huge amount of insects because there's a vast diversity of plants. So for birders, like there's a lot to see, and that's like a whole other side of the ecology that people don't really pay attention to because it's just a bird. But there's a huge diversity.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of there are a lot of interesting things in there. The fynbos is not an incredibly rich from a caloric perspective. It's not generating a huge amount of sustenance, and so whilst you get diversity, the density is actually quite low, and that's reflected in all the species that are selected for the environment. And you get some really subtle things. Just on either side of the Cape Flats, there's a bird that will appear in the Holland Mountains that doesn't appear on the peninsula, and even though the biomes are to the untrained eye almost identical, and so trying to figure out those puzzles, what's really making this environment tick versus that other piece of rock that I can see from the top of Table Mountain, what's going on there, that's part of the whole mystery and the very rewarding process of catching a glimpse of the incredible complexity of the whole story. That's the part I really love. I kind of consider myself a student of complexity, and so whether the complexity emerges in the human body because of some immunological process or at the level of an ecology or indeed the level of the whole world, I'm equally fascinated, and I want to scurry around and follow my nose.
Yeah. I was lucky enough, my dad is an edge conservator and I grew up on De Hoop Nature Reserve, and having the limestone fynbos and the sandstone fynbos meet at the ecotone on Potberg, you've got like this very different type of fynbos that and obviously you've got the coastal fynbos coming in as well. So
yes.
It's
a magnificent property for that reason, and just around the corner you've got De Mont, which is a particularly unique estuary. So I love that corner of the world. In fact, for my recent strategy session at work, we went to De Mont.
Oh, really? Nice. Yeah, I was down the other day. We've got a house in Strathspey, so we spend some time down there quite often still. But it's a beautiful part of the world. But I'm actually getting married at De Hoop Nature Reserve, which is coming up quite soon. So looking forward to that. But
we're going to be friends.
Yeah. No, it's an absolutely amazing place. But just the diversity of species you can see there on the bird side is phenomenal, and obviously on the plant side. But De Hoop's interesting because it's kind of like this dry landscape that you drive to get there, and it's like farmland, especially in summer, and you come over these hard dunes that are pretty barren, and you just like descend into those oases, which is like a massive flay with vast diversity of plant and animal species there. It's phenomenal. I can recommend to anyone to go check it out. Anyway, we're getting sidetracked here, but enough with nature. So Nick, for people who aren't familiar with you were the founder, one of the founding members of Pandemics Data Analysis, which is called Panda. So a South African outfit, which started up in the beginning of the COVID pandemic, specifically to ask tough questions about the response of governments and to sift through the data. Have I given an accurate representation of what Panda does?
What it does, yes, but we're no longer really fairly described as a South African outfit. The organization is now comprehensively international, and so it would be really unfair to the many American and UK and European contingent to do now the majority of the work. It's got a really strong international character, very diverse character, both with respect to culture and geography, and also with respect to the type of skills the organization has attracted. We have scientists from lots of disciplines, and interestingly, that really links back to my earlier little description of ecology. I find that for all types of consideration of complex problems, you really do well if you reach into many different disciplines. And it's one of the problems, I think, with the COVID policy responses. Everybody goes bonkers over epidemiologists who, there's this tiny fraction of them who are at all competent as intellectuals, and for the most part, they're thoroughly boring thinkers with no creativity and no ability to really challenge anything at all. And so this balkanization, if you're not speaking to an epidemiologist or a virologist or an immunologist or a doctor, then why are you speaking to them at all? Whereas some of the best thinking that I've seen come out of the scientific community with respect to COVID is from the ecologists.
Yep.
They're the people I want to spend the most time with, because they really grasp the concept of the virome and its interaction with species, of the evolutionary pressures that are placed upon the virus and indeed on society by every single policy move we make. And they see the broader potential for those to have hidden or second order effects that perhaps the doctors and epidemiologists are completely unable to describe.
Well, I suppose it's a lucky thing we're having this chat, because I'm actually a formally trained ecologist. That was my field of study at university. And this was the first thing that I learned in ecology, is like everything in nature is a complex system. And complex systems are emergent. You can't if you change one thing, you can't, it's not a machine, it's organic. If you change one input, you're not going to have the same output every single time. And it doesn't work like you pull one lever and things change on the other side. And I think that's what early ecologists thought, that nature is mechanistic like that. But later on they figured out that this is actually not the way it works, and it's very complex, and we don't know what we don't know, and we're foolish to try to think that we can know how that's going to work. So yeah, and to segue into exactly what you're saying is just the hubris that we've seen on scientists, coming from scientists who think that it's just a simple mechanistic model, like put on a cloth mask and you're going to stop this virus spreading. That's not how it works. But so you guys assembled a team of people, scientists. You guys got actuaries yourself. You're from a private equity background, but you're an actuary yourself, right? Formerly trained actuary.
Yeah, I'm a qualified actuary. I didn't enjoy the field, so I moved out of it quite quickly in terms of my career, but stayed in the allied field of finance. And as you correctly point out, I run a private equity fund, which I enjoy very much. That's another great place for a generalist to find himself. Yeah.
But so early on, Panda made some predictions about what death rates would be, etc. How have those played out 2 years later? What are the critics being saying about you guys, and how close to correct have you been with retrospect now?
Well, let's take us back to the beginning when the whole thing broke. There were a couple of quite clear falsehoods dominating the thinking at that time. The one was universal susceptibility, and the other one was, actually, people have forgotten this, but at some point it was believed that all of the cases were severely symptomatic, and so there were no people who were asymptomatic out there. And the World Health Organization was talking about a 3.4% case fatality rate. So people were running around and popping 8 billion people times 3.4%, because we were all certainly going to get it. We were all 100% susceptible, and working out that 250 million people would die within weeks. That was kind of the mentality of the moment. And in South Africa, that caused the Sakema modeling unit at the University of Stellenbosch to come out with this astonishing prediction that there would be as many as 357,000 deaths in South Africa within a matter of weeks, and that we would be short some 1 million hospital beds. And it was in the context of that time that I started writing to the National Institute of Communicable Diseases and many NGOs, just expressing my incredulity at these estimates that were being thrown around, pointing out that the early data was completely unsupportive of those ideas. And I said that it would be orders of magnitude less. I threw in the number of 10,000 as being a better guess than 100,000, and it was back of the envelope stuff. I hadn't built a model or anything like that. I mean, don't be ridiculous. You kind of try to be practical. And it was one of the things that I faulted them on, is they all rushed off to try and calibrate these immensely complex models, and the errors that they made with each sequential parameter, which was, those parameters are difficult to observe, or in some cases impossible to observe. That's even worse. Why build a model where you're not capable of observing the parameters? And so that was really early days stuff, and I was dead right. There were not 357,000 deaths within weeks. There weren't even 10,000. In fact, over the time frame that we were talking, 3 weeks to flatten the curve, et cetera, there were not even 1,000 deaths. So, our opponents have often grabbed that early 10,000 estimate when we were talking in the context of that time and said, "Oh, you said there would only ever be 10,000 deaths." I mean, okay, so it's pathetic. Then what happened was we started getting more serious, and people were challenging us. Well, where's your model? And so we by then had brought Stryker into our team, and he had been, we'd noticed him trying to build a model, and we pointed out to him the work that was done by Mike Levitt, demonstrating how uncannily the very simple model based on the Gompertz curve was fitting these pandemics. And we suggested that he attempt to use a model of that nature. And the advantage of that, because it's so simple, you can fit them very quickly to the emergent data, and it gets you a very quick read. And so we had the situation where our first model that we published 8 months later was out by cumulatively less than 1%. And we even used it to make some cheeky predictions. So when the NICD released their model, in terms of which I think they predicted something like 45,000 deaths within a certain number of weeks, we proposed that they would blow through their lowest confidence interval on, I forget the date, I think it was like July the 13th. We were very specific. We said on July 13th, you're going to go through the lowest confidence interval. And as it turned out, they went through it on July the 12th. We were out by 1 day. And this was very embarrassing for them because, their models were full of bells and whistles and, everything that moves. And they couldn't exactly turn around and say, well, there's no point. You're fitting a curve. Well, that was actually an allegation they made. You're fitting a curve as if this was some crime. But we had released our model at the exact same time as them. So we had as much data as they had. Arguably less, because they sit on the actual raw data. They can go and interrogate their stuff as much as they want, whereas we were just getting the same summary information that gets put out to the general public, replete with all its errors and overestimations and batch adjustments and that kind of thing. So the model that we produced was, I'm going to say, it was astonishingly accurate. And it's doubly frustrating then that the wisdom of the mainstream narrative, the mainstream media, was that Panda was underplaying the epidemic or understating it or making light of it or some such nonsense. But I guess if your mentality is that you were going to have a shortage of 1 million hospital beds, and then you locked down and you had no shortage whatsoever, wow, lockdown's amazingly effective at defeating the deadly virus. Whereas what we now know, and we found out shortly thereafter in May 2020, we were analyzing the impact of lockdown on epidemic curves and finding that there was no benefit. But that's something that mainstream people have only caught up with in recent weeks.
Last week,
Johns Hopkins University finally published a meta-analysis comprehensively demonstrating that lockdowns have done absolutely nothing, and concluding, despite that university having been one of the main promoters of lockdowns, that they achieved nothing at immense cost, and that they should never be attempted again under any circumstances whatsoever.
I don't think politicians are going to listen to that, because it seems like they're ignoring it as much as possible. They don't want to admit their failure. You're seeing the narrative flip in the corporate press. On masks, we've seen it happen in the last few weeks. On lockdowns, we've seen it happen in the last few weeks. Vaccine mandates in Canada are starting to fall apart. In the US, they're already falling apart. And luckily in South Africa, we never really had vaccine mandates. But the narrative is starting to shift, which I'm pretty thankful for.
I listened to your excellent interview with Jonathan Witt, and I'm going to put out a quick little advert for that. If anybody's listening and hasn't watched that interview, they really should. It was really genius level stuff. He made quite a lot about the whole transmission mechanism story, and how that narrative has flipped from this ridiculous, crazy, bonkers idea that things were spread by fomites to the airborne aerosol, which we'd spoken about from very early on. And amazingly, that was the first time I was called a conspiracy theorist, was when I proposed that COVID was spread in the same way as other respiratory viruses by airborne aerosols. Conspiracy theorist, that's that was, I couldn't believe it. I barely paid attention to this term, and of course, shortly after that,
but now it's a common one. I'm sure you've had many since then.
Yeah. But it's lost its impact,
Yeah, completely. Yeah. It's like being called a racist or white supremacist or misogynist
or an anti-vaxxer. Anti-vaxxer. That's another one of my favorites.
That's my favorite one.
I don't like frontal lobotomies much, but that doesn't make me.
Yeah. My favorite one, when someone says to me you're an anti-vaxxer, is I say to them you're a pedophile. And that then takes them back a bit. And I'm like, okay, so since we're throwing around ridiculous terms, you want to bring it home a bit and let's talk like adults to each other, because
I like that
terms mean nothing.
The only problem is that, in fact, some of these vaccine pushers are indeed pedophiles, so you've got to be careful.
Turns out. We're going to get into that a bit later. But so Panda made these predictions, or these models, and you guys gathered around a bunch of experts in South Africa first, and then very quickly worldwide had experts. And then I presume you guys approached the South African government or the Department of Health with your models to just say, listen, guys, we think you might be wanting to have a look at this data. How did they respond to that?
In May 2020, there was quite a reasonable level of engagement. We were invited into the South African Coronavirus Modeling Consortium Symposium to give comments, which we delivered. Those comments were faithfully reported in the press, in particular by the Citizen, a newspaper. And then it kind of dried up. And shortly thereafter, the press turned on us, having been willing to publish our articles. Basically all but a couple of outlets refused to carry any material that we generated, and they never gave reasons why. They never faulted it. They never said this is wrong. They would make broad, sweeping smear-like statements like this is going to kill people or something like that. But it virtually dried up until we published an article in News 24, basically pointing out the incredible embarrassment that South Africa's modelers had been. And at that point, it was impossible for the NICD to do anything but engage with us, which they did in a very insincere kind of way. There was a conversation where they weren't actually there to learn anything or to engage or to debate anything. They were there just to tick the box on having spoken to us, and they could move on and continue with the general game of trying to say that everything that Panda said is false, even though it quite clearly wasn't. But over time, what's happened is, of course, yes, all of the major points that we've made, we've got one or two things wrong when it came. We were very surprised by the severity of the second wave that hadn't been on our radar. And we were in particular fooled by, at the beginning of the second wave in Europe, there was a case-demic. There were no deaths accompanying it. So we saw that as kind of evidence that there was not going to be a major second wave of deaths. But apart from that, all of the points we've been making have been sustained over time. And now it's amazing to see the mainstream media and some of the scientists, they're kind of in this panicked climb down mode where they're suddenly trying to say, well, yes, it is indeed aerosol transmission, but that's only for Omicron,
it's their favorite one.
It's ridiculous, changed. Like there's a little subtle change on the spike protein at a couple of points, and suddenly the whole thing changes. Its clinical appearance is different. It transmits differently. It sails straight through a mask. It's just
now it flies rather than swims.
That's right. It does the backstroke. Does the backstroke up the nose or something like that. It's quite amazing what these variants are able to do. My suspicion is that the variants have actually contributed very little. They've been mainly public relations exercises, behavioral science-driven public relations exercises to keep everybody scared.
Yeah. So what's become clear to me, and I'm assuming to you as well, is that the institutions, the authorities have not been following what they say. They've been following the science. They've not been following the science because they've not been following the scientific method. They haven't been using a scientific process. They've been following dogma. But the South African government was clearly following advice of someone. And who do you think that was coming from? Excuse the pun. And what do you think has led to this condition where we find that the government is incapable of actually following the scientific method, and the universities and all these institutions we set up for precisely, we presume, this purpose?
So I'm in complete agreement with you when you say that they were not generating these ideas about policy response locally. That's absolutely for sure, and they are quite clearly beholden to international players who have demanded and driven this kind of lockstep rollout of these, as you point out, these measures that are disconnected from any form of science. And there's a very strange practice that has gone on where the policy prerogative is set, and then a whole bunch of really fake faux experiments are paid for by the same organizations to demonstrate something that they purport to believe validates whatever strange policy has been pursued. So, for example, masks. There was a mad rush to go and set up all these lab type experiments where they try and check what percentage of droplets get stopped by a mask and all of that. But it's completely bananas, because stopping a droplet is pointless if the next thing you do is exhale over the droplet and turn it into an aerosol. So
can we stick on that point for a second, because this is something I've wanted to discuss with Jonathan last week, but we didn't get into it. My understanding of this is I cough into a mask, then the droplet sits on the mask in front of me, and then I breathe through that mask for the rest of the day. And what I'm doing is I'm nebulizing that droplet, basically 100%. Turning it into an aerosol.
Yes.
And it now becomes an aerosol that then wafts out into the general environment.
And the irony is that because fomite transmission is not a thing, that droplet that your mask caught would have fallen to the ground harmless and is instead aerosolized.
You've now weaponized that droplet.
Yes, you've now weaponized the safe droplet. So it's completely bonkers. And all of these guys, they will be shown up as complete embarrassments to science and to reason and to human thought in general, when all of this is eventually exposed. And then we have a more sensible conversation about the lunacy behind the experimental designs, the crazy p-hacking that went on in these observational studies. I mean, and some of them are shameful. They will go and do a study for India and report the result for Uttar Pradesh or something like that, because that's the one that suits the narrative. This is quite scandalous. The idea of pre-registering studies and then reporting the result and publishing it in the journal, even if the result is negative, that idea is out the window, and they only publish the p-hacked studies that produce the result they want for political reasons.
Yeah, I mean, the corruption of science is what I find particularly disconcerting, because, like I said earlier, science is a process. It's not a religion. It's not a dogma, and that's what it's become. It's being, like everything else, becomes this buzzword. We follow the science, TM. But
okay, can I generalize this a little bit, please?
Please do.
It's not corruption of science. It's corruption of the entire social order, and that corruption is caused by the process of centralization that we have been going through. Centralization is guaranteed to corrupt everything.
Absolutely.
That's what happens.
Yeah.
And so when you see these emergent supranational organizations and people who purport to be able to do the thinking on behalf of the entire world, rich people with a plan for the universe, you need to be afraid.
The technocrats.
The technocrats. You need to know for sure that everything's going to be corrupted. The media, religion, science, education. It's all going to be corrupted. And it has been. We are we stand on a precipice right now, really. Either we push back against this tide of centralization and we preserve liberalism and flourishing human societies, or we go into a Malthusian nightmare of obliteration of any kind of generativity, creativity, human flourishing, human agency, and a complete stagnation and lack of progress will ensue.
We're going to North Korea at a global scale, is what it
North
looks
Korea.
like.
North Korea on a global scale is very, very accurate.
Yeah.
And these guys who believe that they, simply by having lots of money, they'll be able to keep knowledge generation proceeding apace are dreaming. In the same way that the Soviet Union absolutely, terminated the generation of knowledge. They had sort of a few technologies that they could tinker with and work out how to build a better mousetrap, but the society just fell behind immediately compared to the West. And that would happen here too. And any societies that escape this kind of Malthusian trap will surpass the ones in it.
You know, and the terrifying thing to me is just seeing how every country on earth followed the same set of rules, or, you know, not rules, but the same response to COVID in lockstep. Operation Lockstep is a real thing. But they followed the same response because they had all been participating in war games, as it were. Event 201, Robert Kennedy discusses this quite well, practicing for a coronavirus pandemic. And what they came up with was a authoritarian response where you have to coordinate the media and you have to kowtow people and keep them in fear. And that's exactly what happened. But it happened the world over at the same time. And this is, like you say, the worry of centralization is that it can't course correct, because all dissenting views are squashed. Anyone who is speaking out against gets deplatformed. I mean, I'm surprised you're still on Twitter. I thought you would have been kicked off a long time ago. But, voices like Robert Malone got taken off the other day. There's
I do an extraordinary amount of algorithm avoidance and self-censorship in order to stay there, which is sad when you think about it. I mean, the centralization enables all this stuff, where the media control and social media control is itself a manifestation of centralization. We've had that situation has been brewing for decades. It didn't all arrive in 2019, 2020. That's been an ongoing process since the end of the Second World War, and one that many people have warned about, but those warnings have not been heeded.
Yeah, and I mean, so just to bring it back to practically what happened. So the South African government was taking orders from the WHO on how to deal with this pandemic.
Not only the WHO, but also many of these Gates-related organizations, which actually give the orders to the WHO. So the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Gavi, CEPI, all these Banana Republic kind of
supranational NPOs who are not beholden to anyone or anything. So they were giving the marching orders. And then how were they getting the countries to follow their lead? How were countries just giving up their ability to make decisions themselves? What leverage did they have over them in order to make that work?
Yeah, well, so I mean, they're able to influence the popular narrative in any country on the planet, right? So there was vast propaganda unleashed. It was very visible in the early days, February, March, April. There was, nobody forgets the falling man and these ridiculous images of surface decontamination of streets in China. To our earlier point that foam-out transmission isn't a thing. This stuff was complete lunacy. But of course, the general public goes, "Oh, deadly virus," and then they all started baying for lockdown. So there was political pressure. There were lots of levers, though. It's not just the political pressure. You've also got infiltrated public health organizations. The public health organizations are funded by the pharmaceutical companies, vaccine stakeholders, and these creepy foundations, Gates Foundation, Soros Foundation. And so they know where their marching orders come from. And when your politician's sitting there being told, "Look, what we want you to do is to take more control, Mr. Politician. Look, the people want it on social media. Here they go. Look, the public health people say, the World Health Organization says, the richest man in the world says, and what are you going to do?" So along came the marching orders, and there was clear coordination. This is like beyond being challenged. People all go conspiracy theory. Well, that's nonsense because it's all been done out in the open. Don't be ridiculous. The coordination is visible, palpable. Who's doing it. So is it criminal? Yeah, I believe so. I think it's crime against humanity, but it's not 6 men in a volcano crater stroking their cats and coming up with plans to rule the world, an Illuminati or some such.
Yeah, no, it's something that I heard you say in a previous interview. It's like Commemoration, right? It's like a flock of swallows that fly together and somehow manage to form these patterns and not hit each other. And that's essentially these NPOs and these big governments flying around each other, and everyone's just feeding off of opportunity, essentially. And us humans are the insects being charred by the birds in that flock,
Yeah, that is definitely, there's an aspect of that which I think is underappreciated. And So some of this is mistaken error at the level of some people. I think they're innocent kind of errors that have been made, particularly by your rank and file people in these public health and medical organizations and at hospitals. I mean, it's quite sad. Yeah, the way medicine is taught these days, they're all taught a very authoritarian, narrow, intellectually very, very narrow version of health and of pathology and so on. And doctors kind of come out with a mindset that the worst thing you can do is allow anybody to challenge you. And so that has bred a culture in great swathes of the medical profession that has terminated the process of error correction. And so they get stuck on very bad memes and models, and they become very hard to shake.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for prime example, I am part of an organization that try to institute a vaccine mandate, and it's an organization for boys aged 11 and up. And there were a few of us pushing back, and we were like, this is insanity. Why would you try to mandate vaccines on these kids? There's myocarditis risk. We knew about that then already. This was December this year. So we knew about that this was a risk. And one of the intellectual heavyweights they had on team vaccination, mandatory vaccination, was a vet. So he's a man of science. And he categorically wrote an email to all the parents going out there, and this is late December, saying, we know cloth masks work. And I'm like, I've sent him a bunch of papers showing that there's no evidence to suggest at all that cloth masks work. This is a scientist, because a vet and a doctor are not too far apart, to be honest. And here he is leveraging his credibility to tell other people, that cloth masks work. Yes. And here I am. I'm an ecologist. What do you know? You're a Bitcoiner, an ecologist. What do you know? The vet says they work. So, and this is what I've seen a lot of going on, is leveraging of credentials, experts, to further perpetuate this madness and this mass psychosis, as it were, because he hasn't done a shred of reading. He hasn't picked up a scientific paper himself, to just keep perpetuating the narrative. He just clings to narrative. And that's what I see happening with our mainstream doctors and healthcare professionals, is they just following narrative like everyone else does, because that's what humans do, right? We're a narrative-driven species. And
absolutely. I mean, and that extends to this whole domain of misinformation, disinformation, and now the new one that the intelligence agencies came up with this week, malinformation. That one hasn't hit the dictionaries yet, so I don't know exactly what it means and how it's distinct from misinformation, which is, what is it? Supposedly saying something false with the intent to deceive. That's misinformation. Now, what is malinformation? I don't know, but it's all a bogus kind of construct, because the kind of thing that happens to us is we'll send an article in to, let's say, News 24, and they'll come back and say, no, that's misinformation. We write back to them and say, please send us the sections we need to correct and some evidence or argument for why they're wrong, and we'll gladly correct them. No, we can't do that. I'll come back to you. And then they never come back. This guy, George Classens, is one of these clowns at News 24. He actually committed to coming back to us and telling us why we were wrong on an article that he complained about. And when we went back to him and said, hey, have you come up with a list yet? And he said, no, I decided it's not worth my time. Kind of thing.
I would engage with you conspiracy theorists and anti-vaxxers.
Yeah.
And this brings me back to the media, right? The thing that has been besides science being corrupted for me, is the media just being, I mean, they're the fourth estate, right? Or the fifth estate, whatever. I get that term wrong. But they're supposed to hold they're supposed to hold the government to account. They're supposed to speak truth to power. And this is something that I heard, I think it was Dave Collins saying the other day. It's like, there's no such thing as speaking truth to power, because power already knows the truth. You're speaking truth to those who don't know what the truth is. Actually, and that's the media's role, essentially. But
sorry.
Why are they the media singing off the same hymn sheet? And is it as simple as the fact that they all get Gates Foundation and Open Society funding?
No, it's not as simple as that. That is definitely a big element of it. So you've got these creatures, these creepy creatures like Nathan Geffen and Mia Milan, who are so just transparently corrupted by the pharmaceutical money they receive. That's part of it. But then you get other guys. What's happening with
like Ivo.
Rob Rose, Ivor Fechter, what's happening with these people? I can't see.
Ivor's not taking any money, I'm sure, but he's committed to the narrative.
Yeah. So, the way I look at it is like this. For decades prior to COVID, on the advent of online media had been chipping away at the business model of the legacy media outlets, and the quality of their journalism and their journalists had been declining for many years. Their financing capacity had been declining, so they were unable to fund proper news desks and investigative journalists and so on. They were really very weak companies, profoundly weakened over decades. And when this new crisis comes along, first of all, it gives them something to talk about, and people are going to be clicking and buying and viewing. That's number one. But then, the economic effects of the lockdown kick in, and they suddenly find themselves in straitened circumstances. And when somebody walks into the room with a checkbook and says, "Hey, would you like some money?" By the way, we're gonna want you to not say anything that contradicts public health doctors and officials, because that could kill people anyway. So that's not too bad. Just say the same thing as Anthony Fauci, and then you'll be okay, and we'll keep funding you. I think that offer is a very hard one for them to refuse. But that's not the end of the story. As the conventional media declines, they start using more and more of the syndicated articles. So you've got
Associated Press,
Project Syndicate, Reuters, and what's the French one called again? Agent. Sorry, it escapes me right now, but they start just republishing their stuff. So if you want to seed a narrative, you bomb it out into the primary publication, and it proliferates all around the world. And that's true not just for, but people don't know this. They think that when it comes to television, the newsreader is reading something that is written by him or the station. Not the case. The actual news sound bites are also syndicated. And so you see there's some quite comical videos where
this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy, or putting their own acting spin on the words as if they're their own and they mean.
You've frozen. We've lost you for a second there. Let's see if that's. There you're back. Sorry, you froze for a second.
No problem.
But yeah, it's grotesque, to see it happening. But at least it is laid bare for people to see, and at least I think 20%, 30% of people are coming to terms with the fact that it's all bullshit, and it really is the death throes of the media industry. But then there's a much more nefarious part of it, which is this whole CRT woke aspect of media that have a different axe to grind. And maybe this is where the Commemoration comes in. They're just kind of flying along with the COVID force or whatever it is. But you've got this whole critical race theory side that's coming in as well. And I see what those journalists, woke journalists, are writing, it's like fundamentally attacking the core of our Western civilization. It's attacking like our core values, and maybe it has something to do with that maxim of like good times create weak men create bad times create strong men, and then strong men create good times, and you have this like cycle. And I think we kind of moving through this period where we've had such good times and we've created such weak men that we're moving into, or have moved into, bad times right now. But this attack on our culture is profound. It's undermining everything. It's undermining people's ability to have concrete facts that you can build a base on top of. So it's postmodernism, right? Like nothing means anything. Anything means nothing.
Yeah.
What is a man? A man can be pregnant. A man can breastfeed. No, obviously you can't. You're a racist. You're a bigot. You're a misogynist for saying that. Where do you think society is heading, and what do you think the effect of this, what I perceive to be toxicity, is on society?
Yeah, I mean, I think you located fairly well in a softening, a weakening. Reality is a hard taskmaster, and so there's a temptation always, I think, to reject the idea that your thoughts and actions and deeds and efforts should, in some moral sense, be connected to a reality. It's easier to deny the existence of the reality, to consider it all to be subjective. Of course, the theory itself is one which is destroyed by its own premises, because if there is no reality, then why is that theory a real one? But it's kind of I think that's exactly what you contend with, because reality is a hard taskmaster. Soft times and soft people are not inclined to being tethered to it. And so if we take a simple example, I mean, I was astonished in one of the few debates I had with one of my adversarials was Professor Moody from the University of Stellenbosch, who's a bioethics professor. And there was a doctor who was on her team as well. And when I cornered that doctor on his lack of evidence for one of his propositions, I forget which one it was, he had nothing to say. He was umming and ahhing. And she stepped in for him and said, he is speaking from his lived experience.
Oh, yes.
Okay, in a scientific discussion, yeah. And it just struck me,
anecdotal evidence at best.
Yeah. So you take any of these shibboleths of this kind of relativist movement. Let's work with the concept of identifying as. Okay, I identify as an X. Now, that already doesn't matter what you say after the word as. You've already departed from reality as soon as those two words come out of your mouth. Why? Because we know a feature of reality is that it is impossible to access the qualia of another entity. There's no mechanism of action described for that. Nobody's ever been able to do it. So the moment you start coming up with this business, I identify as anything, it doesn't matter what it is. You've lost your mind right there and then. You're suffering from a cognitive degeneracy when you've started to piece together a sentence that sounds like that. And so it's a departure from reality right there and then. And anything that follows from it, anything that's built upon it, will also be a great degeneracy. And for people endowed with more common sense, people who live and work in the real world, who actually have to produce things that function and that are wanted by other human beings, that improve society and the world, instead of, some completely bone idle practice indulged in the corridors of academe that has no benefit to man or beast. It's so obviously ruinous. It's so obviously absurd. We don't have to. They might not understand the philosophical reasons why those words don't arrive at conclusions that don't make sense. Their analytical ability might not be there to parse the whole situation and say, there it is, that's the mistake that they're making. But they know that the result or the conclusions are absurd. The average person, the guy who you meet out in the street, your Uber driver, your checkout counter person, they know that those ideas are absurd. And that's the world we find ourselves in, where suddenly the people who have control of the narrative and the power to determine policy are people who believe a great number of things that just ain't so.
So I completely agree with you. But what I find interesting is, how did that come to be? What energy was behind that? Because it's like a turtle on a fence post. Like, it didn't get there by itself. How did that school of thought gain so much power? What energy? Because there's some energy behind it that got it there, that overcame what was before, right?
Well, I mean, these same foundations that have been promoting the malarkey of COVID have also had a hand in promoting the malarkey in politics, right? This whole woke kind of movement is heavily buttressed by some very significant funding. Some of it is very obscured. So, for example, there's the organization Black Lives Matter, which has nothing to do with Black lives actually mattering or anything of that nature. It's kind of a juggernaut propelling woke thinking and woke thought patterns and a certain type of cultural Marxism into the world. And those are heavily funded organizations, the same foundations that are funding these batshit crazy medically oriented media outlets, are also funding organizations like that and promoting these relativist ideas to the great prejudice of our societies. And so we can link all these themes together. I'm not so sure that the great fifth estate ever existed, really. My feeling is that it's always been the case that media is to a greater or lesser extent controlled by an elite, and that elite is always fighting with the hoi polloi for more control over the hoi polloi. And there's a waxing and waning process that takes place in modern societies. In ancient societies, authoritarian societies, those hierarchies could become extremely ossified and stable for many centuries, and then the media is not really even needed, But some of these bad ideas are ways of ensuring that the peasants are fighting amongst themselves rather than turning their attention to the atrocious and corrupt behavior of their erstwhile leaders.
Yeah, if you keep people fighting the culture war, they won't work out. You've got to fight a class war.
That's right.
And that there's.
So I believe that this is true for the simple notion of left and right. I think these are that's an inappropriate descriptor for a dichotomy in politics. So to conservative liberal, that's a completely false, bogus dichotomy. The real dichotomies are between conservative and revolutionary, not progressive.
And tyranny and freedom.
Tyranny and freedom, or liberalism and authoritarianism would be my way of putting it, but yours is just as good. And they'll do anything to avoid people catching a glimpse of that truth, because it becomes easier to find consensus when you describe the world in those terms. We can say, look, were I in North Korea, I would be a revolutionary. But in Sweden, I might well be a conservative because the society has done some sensible things. And you can say I'm a liberal everywhere. That's an absolute position. I'm not an authoritarian. That makes more sense. And you can then say, look, liberal versus authoritarian is an absolute position. Conservative versus revolutionary is a relative position. And let's not talk about progress, because we all want progress. That's true of conservatives. I would conserve the type of society that is capable of flourishing and growing and generating new ideas. So I'm a conservative progressive. But just to describe somebody as non-progressive is kind of nonsensical. I don't think there are such people.
Yeah. Maybe the Amish, but even they just have a slower rate of progression within their own society, right?
Fair point. There are people whose cultural mores are conservative of static civilization, but I think that's an extreme minority.
Yeah, and even the Amish slowly are dragged. There is progress that happens within the Amish society, right? Like some Amish people do ride in a car, whereas 50 years ago they didn't do that. It does sort of happen. But yeah, it's essentially that's what's playing out is tyranny versus freedom. I think you've frozen again there.
Sorry, Ricky, I lost you there quite a big chunk.
No, Ricky, we got you.
I heard tyranny versus freedom. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, all right. So we understand that this is the battle that's playing out, but to what end? Why is the Gates Foundation and the Open Foundation, with the Open Society, why are they trying to push society in this direction? Why are they trying so hard? Why is George Soros spending so much fucking money to push society in the direction that is being pushed in?
I have my doubts as to how much George Soros is entirely in control of that money. I mean, he's a very old man. But I also think we need to back away from blaming everything on a couple of organizations and speak about the spirit of the times a bit. Because there are many: the Atlantic Council, the Trilateral Commission, the
Club of Rome, the WEF. Yeah,
yes, there's a long list of these international clubs. And before we speak about the particular complicity of any one of them in this whole bananas campaign, let's just talk about how this emerges, right? I sort of, over the years, have spoken to a great many people who have gone to Davos. And the thing that struck me, this is going back a long time as well. I remember the first time I was struck by it was in 2005. I spoke to an executive who had just returned from Davos. And I was interested to see what the ideas were that were being spoken about, and what he'd found stimulating and so on. And I simply couldn't get him to talk sense. The first thing that was noticeable was he was very bowled over by his shoulder rubbing with the high and mighty, the rich and famous, the glamorous, They kept on saying, the one dinner I was talking to Angela Merkel, and that kind of comment. And so there was this element of being starstruck. Then the next thing I noticed is there was a fruit salad of jargon came out of his mouth. And as soon as I stopped to ask the question, well, what does that mean? What are the implications? Why are they saying that this is a crisis? What evidence did they show you? It was like a blank look briefly, which gave away the game. They didn't show me any, actually, now that I think about it. But then very excitable talk about the solution, what the world's going to become, the predictions and so on. And so you can imagine when people go to these things year in and year out, they begin to believe their own bullshit. And they sort of start convincing each other that there are these massive global threats that require global solutions that only they are clever enough to determine. And I think that's very much the problem. And so when you look at Gates or Schwab, the first thing you notice about them is their complete lack of humility. They seem to have absolutely no recognition of the complexity of the problems that they're dealing with, or the complexity of society. There's this idea that they are somehow gifted in being able to understand those things, to predict the future, to predict the results of their various interventions. And that's just terribly false. It's not only arrogant, and I think it actually requires you have to have a fairly low level of intellect to get to that position. It doesn't make you intelligent at all if you reach that point of arrogance and hubris. So by definition, I think these centralists are stupid people. No matter how much money they have, or that we must never forget that they can get their money by just being bad human beings. That's very often the case with super wealthy people. So there is this kind of sickness, this mental disorder that goes into perceiving the world in these terms. And as centralization has resulted in a stretching of the inequality of our world, aggregation and concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few, the erosion of the mechanisms by which we would normally dismantle ossifying hierarchies on a periodic basis. So their ability to entrench and promote and propagandize these views has intensified.
And the ultimate goal is centralization of power.
Sure, nothing new under the sun. Control. That, and people say, well, why would they want to do that? They've got so much money. No, that's human nature. This is what happens. It's a continual battle. There are people with the authoritarian impulse, and there are people with the humanity impulse, the agency impulse. I know where I am, and I always have been. I have no aspirations. No matter how much money I earn, and I earn way more money than I could possibly spend, I never want a boat. I never want a plane. I'm interested in the world, and there are a great many things I want to do, but accumulating a ninth house is not one of them, So it's kind of, I think there are almost innate, or maybe if they're not innate, then they stem from very local culture issues, that these sort of embedded memes or programs that run on certain people's brains that push them relentlessly towards increasing control, and as opposed to increasing influence.
But we've seen the petty tyrant come out during COVID. Like everyone knows the Karen meme, right? Like that emerged in COVID. And that's a real phenomenon. Like 1 in 10 people, or whatever the number is, it's a small percentage, are petty tyrants who want to control every aspect of your life.
And they're easy to spot in advance. You sort of know those people, the people you met at the school. You can predict which ones will behave that way. It's the people with this kind of depressive nature. They have this. You get the sense of purposelessness and meaninglessness about them. Their lives are terribly boring. They're terribly stingy with their ideas, their time, their warmth. And those are the people who are going to become the Karens, the people who suddenly find meaning out of the crisis and a sense of control over the people around them that they lacked previously.
And Jordan Peterson captured it quite well with the whole thing of, clean your room. Like these people are the last people to clean their own room first before they go and try to clean society's room. Like they won't fix themselves first. the sphere of their own influence. They'll try to go and fix society in the way that they think they're fixing it, but they're just damaging it because it's an emergent, complex system, and they have no idea what the fuck they're doing.
He's right. He's right. There's no other way of putting it. He's quite simply right.
Yeah.
The other thing to be aware of there is, people say, well, what's the agenda?
Right.
I say, this is a lesson I was taught by one of the really smart guys in Panda, who's a student of propaganda. It's what he studied for most of his life, a political scientist. He said to me, because I was also trying to see what, where's this political agenda expressed? And it's in the predictions.
Yeah.
You don't go and say, Klaus Schwab doesn't stand up and say, listen, my aim is to make sure that you own nothing. He makes a prediction. In the future, the way the world is going, it's inevitable that what the world looks like is that you will own nothing, but you'll be happy. That's the prediction, and that's the agenda. His agenda is that you will own nothing because he wants to control. He wants to. He's worried about these global crises, and he thinks we're all idiots, and none of us will do the right thing. We won't behave ourselves. We're going to drive too many cars and not wear enough masks and all that kind of nonsense, and just harm ourselves and others, and have no interest whatsoever in the greater good. Whereas he has an interest in the greater good, and he will stop.
And that's what it always comes down to. They always use the greater good as an argument, and because he genuinely believes that. He thinks that he has the greater good, and he thinks the world is overpopulated. We are heating the earth, and it's up to him and his group of eggheads to solve this problem. And Jonathan Witt actually said this to me just before I came on the pod. Now he was like, the greater good always equals communism, and essentially, if a politician is talking about the greater good, it's some degree of them trying to control your life and control resources, and it effectively ends up in communism, where you have no agency and they control everything.
Okay, well, so you're making the strong point. Let me be devil's advocate to that for a bit. My sense is that the organizing structures that might in a way optimize our worlds are very scale dependent. So I quite like this idea that we are all communists at home.
Yes.
What do I mean by that? Well, no matter how big the income disparity between myself and my two sons is infinite, right? They earn nothing and I earn everything. So we've got the ultimate sort of inequality, but in terms of expenditure, it's very flat. We all get the same quality healthcare, the same quality food. I drink slightly more wine than them, but they go through clothes and sporting equipment at a rate of knots. So we sort of have this very flat economy in the Hudson household. It's a communist world. 100% of the income is taxed, and it's divided equally in this mini society that we've got. And long may that last. When it comes to my neighborhood, I might feel quite equally that we should all, really contribute quite a lot. And when people fall upon hard times, we should help them out, which is kind of getting into a more socialist kind of welfare state kind of mentality. By the time I get up to the World Health Organization, I'm a radical anarcho-libertarian. I want the moment there's somebody sitting in Tedros's chair, doesn't matter whether it's Tedros or a successor, I want them run out of town. I want them to have no ability to affect my life whatsoever. And that I think is it's not just something, that's my feeling and that's my kind of sensibility about the world. No, this goes to the very structure of the problems that we've been talking about. Progress is fundamentally evolutionary. Tick. So that means you need diversity of thoughts. Tick. It means you need error correction, which cannot take place in centralized societies. Tick. But more than that, we can also say that we are social animals, and some evolution takes place faster and more creatively when we join our efforts and undertake certain commitments and reciprocal arrangements, which we must be held to by systems of laws. And so at some level, we are working for a greater good and in a communitarian kind of sense. But the problem is that when people try to force that into ever larger levels of scale, the benefits of the evolutionary impulse or the evolutionary creation become lost, and the sacrifice of the mode of error correction becomes very costly.
And it comes down to kin selection as well, right? So the closer your level of relatedness,
No, I've always thought group selection was a load of codswallop.
No, but so kin selection. So like if you are acting at the level of the family unit, there's a higher degree of relatedness, and you're therefore more likely to act selflessly.
Yes.
There's altruism function at that level, but it doesn't scale at all, because as soon as relatedness drops away, then. But Wilson and Hamilton have had this. This is a long ongoing debate in the evolutionary biology field, right?
Yeah,
very much so. Yeah.
I think we have evolved to lavish our attention on in-groups and people who are around us. That makes sense in the context of that social explanation I gave just now. I think the evolutionary biologists overplay these calculations of genetic relatedness. I think it's
very mechanistic.
Yeah,
and simple.
Very reductionist. Very reductionist.
Absolutely. But I mean, it works in eusocial insects that have a queen, for example, where all animals in the hive are all essentially brothers and sisters and related. But that for wasps and bees and ants doesn't work for. How do you explain it in monkeys? Or in meerkats, for example.
Yeah, it completely falls over when you're trying to explain phenomena like homosexuality in haplodiploid animals. So,
right.
It's kind of. Look, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think all those thinkers are fascinating, and I read their material.
Yes.
The reason I know about it is because it was interesting to me at some time. But I just make the comment that it's overplayed as an idea. That's all. They're useful models for thinking about the way different social structures happen arise in the animal kingdom.
Have you heard Richard Dawkins's theory on homosexuality? One of his hypothesis is called the sneaky fucker hypothesis, which essentially postulates that while the male is away, the homosexual will play. So he used cuttlefish as an example, where the male cuttlefish has got a harem of females, and then obviously there's some sneaker males that are not as alpha as the male cuttlefish who's running the show. And while the male cuttlefish is off hunting or looking after other females, the beta male, the sneaky fucker, will go and he'll act like a female. So the alpha male actually thinks he's a female, but then when the alpha male is not looking, he's off inseminating the other females, and that's how the homosexual gene can be propagated potentially. I might have paraphrased slightly out of turn, but you get the concept.
Yeah, that I hadn't heard it being called that. Perhaps for obvious reasons. Maybe a lot of authors are not prepared to repeat the phrase. But just for the time being, I'm not. I get a bad taste in my mouth hearing the name Richard Dawkins, because he's been on the extremely wrong side of this whole COVID debate. Much to my disappointment, because I really do admire him. His neo-Darwinistic sort of worldview, I think, was particularly fruitful. I think he I always thought he got the view on religion completely wrong, but. I don't require of thinkers that they get everything right. It's just that I think he's been one of the people who's been very damaging in this whole process. He could have been a person who saw the frailties of this universal, all-encompassing approach to trying to solve the problem of COVID. He, of all people, should have seen through that and seen the benefits of a more evolutionary and less arrogant response. But he didn't. And so I'm disappointed. I'm still cross with him. Richard, you've been a naughty boy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, his writing in The Selfish Gene and The Blind Watchmaker was seminal for me in understanding, evolutionary biology, and it really shaped my thinking on that. But I was very disappointed. I thought he of all people would get this, that you cannot manage a complex system with a top-down hierarchy. Like, obviously, that's not going to work. And another
some understanding of the ecology of the viro and human interaction. He just exhibited none of it. It was quite a complete disgrace.
And another big thinker, which let me down big time, was Nassim Taleb. He's completely lost the plot.
Yes, he lost it completely. Yeah, and very early on. I think what happened was he got scared and then try to rationalize the fact that he had got scared after the fact. Very embarrassingly so. It's sort of very hard to come back from it. He's going to be embarrassed. This is going to dog him for the rest of his life.
He's done. He's done.
It's interesting to talk about these things, because I mean, I had this incredibly uncomfortable feeling about Harari. It was uncanny. Like, I read all three of his books because this guy was being pumped and promoted so much, and I thought his thinking was ghastly. He was very funny and very amusing, and he told some very interesting anecdotes and had these sort of little vignettes which were appealing.
Yes.
And I think that's what sold the books. But the overarching philosophy that he was communicating, I thought, was terribly dangerous and creepy. And I don't think it's a coincidence that he was kind of being promoted by Davos and the World Economic Forum people.
He's their high priest.
As a high priest of sorts. Another one is Singer, the utilitarian philosopher who was promoted out of nowhere. Utilitarianism, I think, had been long understood to be like a particularly immature way of conceiving of philosophy and of society or trying to plan it. But all of a sudden, utilitarianism was back on the map, and this guy was appearing on everybody's podcast and everybody's TED talk. And promoting this kind of ridiculous doctrine of not just utilitarianism, but utilitarianism with respect to all sorts of complex phenomena. And so I'd sort of seen those two as being harbingers of doom. I just didn't know what doom,
Yeah. And so there's one academic who I actually haven't followed through this process, and I'm not sure familiar with his work, Jared Diamond. He wrote the book Guns, Germs, and Steel, The World After Tomorrow, Collapse.
Yes.
I haven't followed his work.
I'd been taught to not like Jared Diamond before I read Jared Diamond, which is always a little bit unfair. But David Deutsch pointed out the incredibly Malthusian pattern of his thinking. His account of Easter Island and the Rapa Nui and their stone idols and so on. His vision of it was that they ran out of trees, and it's as simple as that. And the warning is that we need to think of the earth as having finite resources and not be so greedy and profligate.
Yes.
Whereas, in David Deutsch's critical rationalist account, what happened is that the Rapa Nui had a social system that failed to embrace evolutionary knowledge and error correction. And when they started running out of trees, they built more stone idols because they felt that the gods needed to make more trees grow, or whatever the case may be. They didn't evolve. They didn't develop technologies to deal with the problem. Trees also ran out in Europe in an astonishing fashion, and they invented new technologies.
The Easter Island example is very, very striking to what we see today, with governments unwilling to course correct. And effectively, when the Spanish arrived in Easter Island in the 1700s something, there was 111 islanders left, of which half were hiding in caves and the other half were trying to eat them. And there were no more trees left. It was literally a desert island. I mean, it was a lush rainforest before, with over 100 different species of endemic palms that only grew there. And they ended up eating each other because they completely destroyed the island, chopped out all the trees, and the rain because that.
The reason I'm laughing right now is I just remembered a little part of the story of my intellectual relationship, if you like, with Jared Diamond, is that my first encounter with him was actually before I had read about him, and I'd made a mental note to read his books, because here was this guy who had an almost complete overlap with me in terms of the things that he was most interested in. We had an uncanny overlap in terms of our preferences in classical music. I'm a huge admirer of Sibelius and Bach, and those are the first ones that come out of his mouth. And the way in which he described his admiration for that music, it sounded like it was me talking. And then he opens his mouth in the second part of the interview, and he says, the other thing I love watching is birds. And it talks about ornithology. And I'm listening to this person and saying, no, you must be joking. And I had this sense of incredible correspondence with the values and approaches of this person, except that when it came to the most important things in philosophy, I had a complete disagreement. That was difficult. It was very interesting for me that we had aesthetically and kind of at some very essential personal level a correspondence, but when it came to thinking about the world, we had completely different views of of society and of what was good and what was bad.
It'll be so. I haven't looked at any of his commentary on what's happening with the totalitarianism of the 2020s, but it'll be interesting to go and see, because, like you say, his solutions or his thinking would seem to be along the line of, we need clever technocrats to solve these problems for us, so that humanity can be defended against itself. Whereas a decentralized solution is probably a much better way out of this, because you can have a whole bunch of societies figuring out if each country had their own response to COVID, we would not have a crisis because we would figure out very quickly, okay, these guys are failing dramatically. These guys are succeeding. And then people can use that information how they will. And we see this happening in America. It's probably the only place in the world that is really like this microcosm where it's happening, where Florida is Floridaing. They're doing their thing. They don't give a shit. They're full of fat, diabetic, sick people, but they're living their best lives. And the death rates are no different from New York, where they are living in a North Korea.
My old hometown that has been completely destroyed based on the stories told by the few friends that I have who are still living there.
And it's a mass exodus. Anyone who can leave is leaving. And they'll go to Florida. Because surprise, Florida, you just want freedom.
Where a couple of Panda members are, getting up and leaving Washington State for Arizona or Texas. This is a very real story. There's an exodus, and you see that in a way, that's the fortunate thing about America. And I'll tell you a story about our interactions with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The very first meeting we had with them came in the wake of my first webinar with Peter Castleton, which was for the South African Venture Capital Association. That thing did very well because a number of prominent people promoted it, including Helen Ziller with 1 million followers on Twitter. And so it got quite rapid attention, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation people had been watching it. And so when we had this meeting with them, brokered by one of the virologists here in South Africa, who was secretly concerned about lockdowns as being a humanitarian crisis, but not prepared to say so in public, we met with them, and of the many things that we'd said in that webinar, pointing out that the consequence of the disease was not as great as everybody was talking about. Lockdowns were going to have a huge cost that wasn't being calculated. Nobody was doing a cost-benefit analysis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We went on and on in that webinar, poking holes in everything that the Gates Foundation was promoting. In the question and answer session, I'd been asked, what did I think about America's failure to produce a federal response? And I'd said I thought it was quite a good thing because we'd get 50 different states doing 50 different things. And we will, at least after the fact, be able to see what worked and what didn't. When I came into that meeting with the Gates Foundation, they went straight to that issue. They were infuriated by that answer. It was the challenge to the centralization, the challenge to the authoritarian approach, which upset them the most.
Yeah.
Not the actual criticism of their bad science.
And this is what it comes down to at the end of the day, right? It's freedom versus tyranny, and the authoritarians thinking they know best. But so in my mind, the way that these authoritarians have managed to coordinate and keep this power play going is that they have positioned themselves closest to the money spigot. So they control the policy. So crisis happens, and I'm of the opinion that COVID happened at a very, very lucky time for the US because their economy their debt levels are massively unsustainable. And they needed to bail out the banking system once again, effectively. They're on the brink of a sovereign debt crisis. So they have to print more money. The whole world, all the central banks got to print more money, and they've got to coordinate it. And this is what we've seen since 2008. The Fed will run the money printer, and then the ECB and the BOJ will slow down printing. And then as soon as the Fed slows down their money printing, they stop tapering. The ECB speeds up, Bank of Japan speeds up, et cetera, et cetera. But where does all of this money go? It makes its way into society, obviously, but how does it make its way? So COVID is a great case study for that, because that money that they printed had to be released into the economy somehow. And obviously one of the prime benefactors of that were Pfizer, Moderna, J&J. And then all of these NPOs. But I don't know how much money the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, well, just the Gates Foundation now, got from the US government. But I'm quite sure they got some money. Because that's just how these things work. So you could apply for funding, for example. There were grants being given out to businesses. A friend of mine runs a wine company in South Africa that exports to the US, and they got corporate support from the US government. They got like 30 grand US because they're a company. The average Joe on the street got 2 grand, but their company got 30 grand. So that's a drop in the bucket. But these companies are having money pumped into them, and the closer you are to the money spigot, and this is the Cantillon effect, the more of this money you can get. And this is what politics is effectively about.
Yes.
When you have central banking, central banking and the ability to centralize the money system, or like you said earlier, it will be corrupted. That's the nature of centralization. And I mean, that's effectively what's happened to central banking. And that's why we've got the military industrial complex. That's why you've got Raytheon and Boeing and Lockheed Martin bombing the shit out of people in Yemen through the Saudis. But, someone's paying for those bombs. They're paying, $3 million a smart bomb to kill someone with a $20 AK-47. That's 50 years old. Doesn't make sense when you think about it that way. But it does make sense when you think about the fact that Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and Boeing need to keep that machine going.
Sure.
So the central to all of this evil that I see is the fact that there's something that's enabling the Malthusians, that's enabling the authoritarians to enforce this authoritarianism across the world, and that's because they have access to the money printer, and because they spend it first, they don't experience the inflation. If they print $1 million and we only had $1 million in circulation, they double the money supply. And they are the first guys to spend that $1 million. There's no inflation for them because that money hasn't entered the formal money supply yet. But as soon as it then washes down through the cascades through the economy, by the time it gets to the man on the street, that dollar is no longer worth $1, it's worth half. So they can keep enriching themselves because governments don't sustain themselves through taxes anymore. They sustain themselves through the money printer. So it's a Ponzi scheme, effectively. And this is where... Sorry, carry on.
It's theft. It's theft by the elites who are proximate to the central banking halls of power from everybody else, and that's becoming clearer and clearer by the day. It should always have been clear. It's been obscured by the fetid shrouds of the modern monetary theory. Another one of these electric fence issues.
MMT.
You may not criticize lockdown, you may not criticize the vaccines, you may not criticize MMT.
Because if you criticize MMT, you're criticizing Stephanie Kelton, and therefore you're a sexist.
Yes.
You criticize Paul Krugman, you're criticizing a Nobel laureate. How dare you, peasant? You should know your place.
Yeah.
But this is why I am so enthusiastic about Bitcoin, because you've got this system that for the first time ever is a fair distribution of money that relies on work. So just like gold mining, it requires work to dig it out the ground, and that's why gold actually has a value to it. It's because there's energy has gone in, it's scarce, it can't be reproduced in any other way. There's a couple of different boxes that money has to tick before it can be a money. But gold has been co-opted because it has a physical nature, and you can get it, centralize it, and then you can corrupt it, and you can issue paper money on top of it, and then you have the fiat system. So Bitcoin is interesting in that regard.
Yeah, so that's a pretty good analysis. I mean, money is one of the hardest things to think about intellectually. I really have, despite having studied it pretty much all my life, the more I study it, the more I realize it's actually a hugely complicated phenomenon. I love the way Rahim. I'm always terrified of saying his surname. Tagizadeghan is his name. Tagizadeghan from the Mises Institute. I love the way he conceives of it. He reminds people to start by thinking of the quality of money. He uses the term moneyness. And that is so helpful because so you can imagine anything being, well, not anything, but a great many things as having some of the characteristics that you would call moneyness. And in that, the first list is really, a social agreement that this is going to be acting as a mode of exchange and a medium of storage of value, temporary storage of value. Whatever, all these characteristics which we've been listing are there by virtue of some agreement. And what are the things that make it easier to agree? Well, the government enforcing it as the only game in town is not a bad one, until the government starts debasing the currency, and then somebody has to invent something new, and in come the Bitcoin.
Which happens every single time. Governments, the fiat currencies have 100% failure rate over a long enough time frame.
Yes, that's right. Interesting. They're fundamentally corruptible, right? But they do become corruptible as government scales. This is the solution that I think is, if you wanted to make a great contribution to mankind, you'd find a way to entrench antitrust legislation more firmly in society, and to make sure that government was also subject to it. Because it's a very, I encourage people to think of government as yet another corporation, just one with a couple of extra rights and benefits, or that the board of directors are the elected politicians. So in the same way that you would, and instead of having one share, one vote, you have one man, one vote in the sort of members of this corporation, who are ourselves, the citizens. And then the directors you vote are the politicians, and then they're all the employees of the company, who are the bureaucrats and the civil what do you call them? Civil servants. And so think about it that way. Why don't we have antitrust? Why do we not break up government when it gets too large? Because otherwise what happens is it gets infiltrated by nefarious actors and other corporations. They start oligopolizing. They start infiltrating each other and behaving in a way that suits the executives and the bureaucrats, and they start having to buy each other off, because pay each other off, because what they're doing is wrong. And if people knew about it, they would be furious, and they might get unelected. So we need to.
And then they engineer a crisis, and then they engineer that crisis, and then they say, in order to deal with this crisis, we need to print a lot of money. And this is where the problem comes in.
Yes,
because people will give up freedom for a little bit of temporary security. And to quote paraphrase Benjamin Franklin, you'll end up with neither. Vaccine mandates, case in point. So this is why Bitcoin is great, is because it doesn't matter what the politician. You can engineer a crisis. You cannot print more Bitcoin, and you do not have control over the Bitcoin. You don't, and the beauty of it, and for me, forget about the financial value. That's just a nice little benefit. The real thing is the strength of the network, because it is so decentralized, and it incentivizes energy production. And humanity is nothing but our ability to marshal energy. The more energy we can marshal around ourselves, the higher our standard of living will be as we move up to a higher phase of society.
That is 100% correct. In fact, it's one area where I agree with the technocrats. The original 1930s technocrats thought that money should be underpinned by energy. And I've often thought about that. That we should have a tether between the dollar and the jewel.
Well, the dollar is exchangeable.
Sorry?
This is what Bitcoin is.
Exactly. So I'm agreeing with you. I guess because you've got your audience is a Bitcoin community, I would make a couple of appeals to that community, because what I've noticed is that they're kind of, although the actual basic substance of the ideas are very, very good, and I myself am an investor in not in Bitcoin and not in any other currencies, any other cryptocurrencies, that is.
Brilliant. They're gonna love you.
I've noticed a few things that worry me, and that is the appearance of perpetual motion machines in the lingo and conceptualization of the cryptocurrency and extended financial ecosystem around it. There are claims being made which cannot possibly be true of surefire ways to get rich, and they are, as I say, the financial equivalents of the physicist's perpetual motion machine. They do not exist. You can sell that. You can see that at face value there. And what's happening there is there are a bunch of people who understand something about Bitcoin, and they're very enthusiastic about the parts they do understand. And their enthusiasm becomes so great that they start imagining a world that their own economic or financial understanding is not adequate to perceive, cannot exist. So that is dangerous. The reason I mention this is I think it's important that we manage the system responsibly, so we don't have little things budding off in the early days that are doomed to failure and spectacular collapse, because they are actually Ponzi schemes hanging off the side of the Bitcoin community. I think there's a real danger of that emerging.
Absolutely. And we see this every day. Every single day, there's some crypto Ponzi scheme that collapses. But this is why I stay away from all other cryptocurrencies. And this wasn't always the case for me. Back in 2017, I still believed in a multi-coin hypothesis, where you can have each company can have their own coin, and free market for money and all of that. And that's fine. I still believe that you can have a free market for money. I just don't think they'll work, because what Bitcoin specifically is seeking to achieve is it is trying to it's like a virus or a parasite that will go and find the cheapest sources of electricity, of energy. And those cheapest sources of energy are always stranded energy that cannot be distributed. And that's why they're so cheap. They have no value because there's no buyers. So what you can do is you can take a Bitcoin miner to a solar power plant in the middle of the Karoo that may not be connected up to the power grid because Eskom has reneged on the deal with the IPP for him to sell that power into the grid. Or there might not be demand for that power at that point in time. Let's say he's producing peak power at 10 a.m. And there isn't peak demand at 10 a.m. So he's got all the surplus capacity that the grid won't take. Bitcoin miners will take that. So they'll be the buyers of first and last resort. So they will buy up any electricity you have, limited by how much mining hardware there is. And obviously, as long as there's surplus energy, they'll put more miners there.
No, I understand that concept. It's very easy to understand. What happens when the mining has stopped?
So when the mining has stopped in the year 2100, because every 4 years, the amount of Bitcoin that gets produced, every block gets cut in half. So currently we're at 6.25 Bitcoin every 10 minutes for every block. In the next 3 years, that'll get cut to 3.125 Bitcoin. And so there's a deflation of money supply. But as you say, at a certain point, there'll be no more Bitcoin mined. Now, the only way that the Bitcoin network can sustain itself is through fees. So there's a fee market that people compete with for transactions. So if I want to send you some Bitcoin in an on-chain transaction, there's basically an auction process for transaction fees where I say, cool, I'll pay 5 Satoshis per byte of data to send. The going rate is 1 Satoshi per byte, so therefore I'll be prioritized to be put into the next block. So there'll always be transactions that need to go through immediately, and there'll be transactions that you can wait 2 weeks to go through, for example, because you're sending to yourself, for example. It doesn't matter how long it takes. So you need that fee market to develop, which has happened to some extent. Currently, there's not that much congestion on the network, so the fees aren't that high. Hopefully, this problem works itself out as more people adopt Bitcoin. The fee market will go up and up and up, and it'll be quite expensive to transact on chain, and that will push things to a second layer with technologies like Lightning, where you can transact with each other instantly and almost cheaply in a very private manner. The point is, it's the only working alternative to central banking we have right now, and also an alternative that really favors localized energy production in a decentralized manner. So what I mean by that is you can take your house off grid to the Karoo somewhere, set up some solar, and not be tethered to Eskom, overbuild your solar capacity by 300%, and the 100% you use for your house demands, the other 200% you mine Bitcoin with for the next 20 years, and you accumulate that Bitcoin. You effectively become your own bank, and you become completely censorship resistant, because what we've seen happening is the financial system is being weaponized. And people like you and me are going to be cut off from the financial system at some point in time because of our views, unless we comply. And we know that communities like Orania will probably be the first guys to be cut off from the financial system in South Africa. And they need some alternative system. So Bitcoin exists for these guys. So I think as we see more tyranny and authoritarianism rising, we are going to see people moving to an alternative. And an example of this is the truckers in Canada now who raised $9 million on GoFundMe, and then GoFundMe stole their money. They just said, oh, sorry, we're not going to pay you out because you guys are radical right-wing white supremacists, pick the fucking term. And we're gonna donate your money to worthy causes that we agree with, which are left-wing causes. So they've effectively been censored. But now these truckers, they've set up a Bitcoin server to receive. Well, they haven't set up a Bitcoin server, but someone has set up a Bitcoin address for them, and now everyone's donating money via Bitcoin to these guys. I've sent some sats over to them, and no one can stop it. And that's beautiful in a world of censorship. To have censorship-resistant money means that you can keep living, because if they can censor your money, it's going to go pretty badly for you. So it's interesting. I'm by no means saying it's a done deal and Bitcoin is going to win. They can attack it, and it's built in a manner that is censorship resistant. So it'll be very hard for them to take it down. But it's hell of interesting.
Yes, I can see the potential for private money to win by virtue of some developing technologies like this. I certainly that's palpable for me. I'm not of the view that the the fiat money system can survive this time around, because this is not a case of Weimar Germany or Zimbabwe, an isolated case where, the scale of this, I think, is such that whatever solution comes is going to be a radical one.
Yeah. And they're pushing for it.
It'll bring down an entire. It has the feeling that it'll bring down an entire system. So when Weimar falls over, well, that's just one fiat currency. You can still go and trade in the dollar and the pound or whatever, pound sterling. But this is going to be spectacular, this failure.
Yeah.
I mean, how long do you think we've got? I don't think it's much longer. We're going to have the mother of all financial collapses coming soon, right?
Well, the WF is pushing for it, and the Build Back Better clan, and all of them are pushing for Agenda 2030, right? So that's when they know the jig is up by. They need to have a central bank digital currency.
They're not clever enough to calculate it with that precision, though. This is the thing that worries me.
No, true.
And probably half of them believe in MMT. So
yeah,
they're not that smart. What I think about more is, there's clearly, you saw the central bankers disappearing off to Israel in December, and they sat there discussing with each other what they would do in the event of an economic collapse, a financial collapse. And of course, they were saying, oh, well, we're going to have to replace our currencies with central bank digital currencies, and maybe they would have to be programmable so that we can make sure that we can impose the kind of austerity measures that are going to be needed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's that discussion taking place. When they were discussing what was going to cause it, it was very interesting. They didn't say it's going to collapse because we've all been printing money at too high a rate. They said, no, there's going to be a cyber attack. That's what's going to cause it. Yeah.
Well, they telling you what they're going to do the controlled demolition of it. When they are ready.
Yeah. Why do they need the cyber attack? That's obviously bogus, right? It's sort of the idea is, oh, well, that'll bring down the banking system, and we'll have to replace it with another banking system. But that also runs on the internet, you idiots. So. What they'll have to do then is they're going to make, ID-based internet access so that they can check that these terrible hackers who are going to. But of course, it's not going to be hackers. It's
going to be them.
It's almost comical. But this is crazy talk now, Ricky. 99% of the people out there listening to the last 5 minutes of conversation would think we're crazy.
Not our listeners. They're all like, this is exactly what's going to happen, right? Yeah. Because they are nothing if not extremely filled with hubris. They honestly believe that they can control this whole thing. But what they don't realize is that there's an alternative, which is Bitcoin, which is an emergent system. Because it's open source and because it's distributed, anyone can work on Bitcoin. Anyone can come up with any solution. So, I've got a friend in Mossel Bay who's busy. He started a project called Bitcoin Advocacy, which is effectively they're trying to emulate what happened in El Salvador. They're trying to emulate that in Mossel Bay, where we're getting a circular economy of Bitcoin going in the local township, and they're trying to drive adoption. And they've got the whole world of Bitcoiners like pouring support into them. Guys are offering them technical and logistical support on how to roll out these strategies and how to build out these decentralized solutions. And what the powers that be, the World Economic Forum type we have to do is play a game of whack-a-mole, where you've just got these guys building completely distributed systems in their own manner to suit their own communities all the time. And it's a virus, you can't stop it. And you can't immunize against it. What you can do is make it illegal and make the normies scared of it. But at a certain point, the normies, if life becomes bad enough, the normies will be forced to adopt it, They'll take the risk.
Help me understand something. With the ultimately defined supply, what's the technical term for that again? When it's
got a hard cap. It's got a limited supply.
Hard cap.
This is deflationary money,
How does one avoid a situation where people who simply buy and hoard the coin don't become artificially wealthy, having not actually created anything of value themselves or built anything or contributed anything to the society? That sounds to me like another version of expropriation of the have-nots by the haves. Just a different means that they've kind of written the rules of the game to suit the original holders, if you like.
So the original holders had to go and buy that Bitcoin to get it or mine it
Yes.
themselves. If they mined it themselves, they expended energy, which bootstrapped the
Yes.
network and providing security for the network in the early days.
Yes.
So
Yes.
they were, but now there are guys who bought Bitcoin super early, the early speculators, right? And by
Yeah.
virtue of them holding that Bitcoin and not selling it, they're removing supply off of the market and they're pumping the price up, which then brings more people in because they see the prices pumping. And that's how you get number go up technology is what they colloquially call it. But that's what brings in people, the hype of the price going up. But ultimately what happens is if you
Yeah.
are
Then it
not
gets untethered
producing,
from energy.
well, if you're not producing anything of value, you are going to lose your Bitcoin because you can hang on to it and hoard it, but you're going to have to spend it at some point in time. And if you are not providing value to other people in order to earn more Bitcoin, you're just going to hemorrhage Bitcoin slowly, slowly, slowly. And eventually your Bitcoin is going to run out. Let's take a 2-generation, 3-generation time frame here. Like 80 years, your Bitcoin is going to run out because you're not producing anything of value. So the parasitic types that are just, they might have bought Bitcoin early on, will slowly lose their value. So the Gini coefficient of Bitcoin actually is decreasing over time because there's a bunch of guys who bought Bitcoin in 2013 who didn't really know much about it. They were just like techie types. They heard about it. They bought 100 coins and then they kind of just held it. They don't work in Bitcoin anymore or at all. So they don't really know what's going on. But then they don't understand the ideology behind it of we're fighting a revolution here. They sell their Bitcoin for a Lamborghini, you know? Now that Bitcoin is gone, they've got the
Yeah.
Lamborghini, which in 5 years' time is fucking gone as well. But their Bitcoin is gone to someone else, and that's not coming back to them again unless they can, go and buy more at a much higher price. So you have this fair distribution of Bitcoin that is going to emerge because it fundamentally is still tethered to energy. If you're not producing value, you're not going to be able to hang on to your Bitcoin, and that's how you defund the bankers.
This is the question that hasn't been answered for me yet: is doesn't the tether disappear when you stop mining?
Well, no, mining doesn't stop. So miners process transactions. So even though no new Bitcoin are being brought into creation, they're still processing transactions. So the energy consumption of the Bitcoin network still carries on. So mining doesn't stop at the end. It carries on, and presumably, and this is the part that we really hope works out, the fee market develops to such a degree that it's still profitable to mine because of the fees you'll earn on processing transactions.
Okay, that's the part I hadn't understood to that. I need to get into this. I need to understand it better. But I sort of there's that intuition that there's a lot of good here, but there's some things that have to be described better economically in order to sort of convince me that there isn't something fundamentally unstable about the setup. For the time being, I become an investor because it's one currency that might not be unstable, whereas all the rest are definitely unstable.
Yeah, absolutely. And the best thing about Bitcoin is for people like you to try to poke holes in it as best you can. Because if Bitcoin cannot stand up to scrutiny of people like you, then it's not worth a damn thing. If it can't stand on its own 2 feet, and you've got to have the best and brightest minds look at it and be like, this can work. Otherwise, what's the point?
The answer will ultimately be in the attendant technologies. So if there's this stock, and obviously the utility of money is something that's not constant over time. There are fluctuations and so on. So how you absorb that, I think I can have in mind all sorts of ideas for exploring that kind of sort of contango development, if you like. And it's definitely something I need to find the time to look into. In fact, I was getting quite enthusiastic about it before COVID arrived. Maybe that was like the worst financial impact on me of COVID.
Well, I mean, it went from $8,000. Well, $3,000 is the drop in the March of when COVID started. That went down to $3,500 to $60,000. So you're right. It was that ship has unfortunately passed. But yeah, Nick, thank you so much for your time. I think we'll definitely have some chats about this in the future. And I'd really enjoyed this conversation. And for our listeners, where can they track down your work and follow you?
www.pandata.org. If you're one of the brave people on Twitter who hasn't been censored and suspended yet, you can find me at Nick Hudson CT for Cape Town. And it shows you how naive I was when I went on to Twitter for the first time all those months ago. There we go. So yeah, pandata.org, Nick Hudson CT.
Are you still doing your morning thoughts videos?
Occasionally. I have started the year with a bang, both on the work front and Panda front. So the sort of 15 minutes that I need to record the 1.5 minute thing have been a little bit hard to come by. I prioritize my life, kind of look after my investors who, I have a fiduciary responsibility to look after Panda. And then it's family and exercise. And I know I feel terrible saying it that it is in that order, but that's just the cruel reality of my life right now, is that family and exercise are kind of sitting behind a diary every time I open my eyes. And so that's how it goes. I'm staying fit though. I've managed to lose some of my lockdown pounds.
All right, Nick, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and we'll definitely chat to you soon. Have a good evening, man.
Good, Ricky. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Lekker. Cheers, man.